Good morning. Welcome to Channing Unitarian Universalist Church. We're glad that you joined us for worship today. Whoever you are, whatever your theological, spiritual, political, sexual, or racial orientation or gender identity, you are welcome to worship here and become a part of this community. So continuing something that Julie started last week, I just wanted to bring up a couple of important dates for world religions and cultures that we share our community with. Today is the day of observance of the death of the Prophet Muhammad. This is the day that they believe that Muhammad died, and they observe observing Muslims observe this with a simple dinner, followed by prayers and a sermon at the mosque. And this is a moment that they use to celebrate the Prophet Muhammad and to, as a reminder, to be kind to each other and to honor his teachings and to celebrate this day with an act of kindness. But it also teaches us that death is a part of life and that we should live as fully present as we can. Tomorrow begins Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. That's a 2-day observance that marks traditionally the anniversary of Adam and Eve, of the creation of Adam and Eve. So that's how far back that calendar goes. Rosh Hashanah customs include sounding the shofar. It's a ram's horn that sometimes you'll see. I think Stephen Colbert kind of made that famous. Following the prescription of the Hebrew Bible to raise a noise on Yom Teruah. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. It includes attending synagogue services and reciting a special liturgy, and also festive meals. And then Friday, October 1st, begins LGBT History Month. So it celebrates the achievements of 31 lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender icons. You can follow this on lgbthistorymonth.com. People they will be observing will include Hans Christian Andersen, the fairy tale author of The Little Mermaid and Other Stories. A lot of famous names in here. It's hard. Bell Hooks, the author and feminist. You may have seen her name spelled out. It's always all lowercase. That was the way she wanted it. Lawrence of Arabia, great movie, but also a real person. And two of my favorite Amy's, Amy Schneider, the longtime Jeopardy champion, and Amy Walter, the political analyst, who you can see Mondays on the PBS NewsHour. Are there any announcements? Julie?
Saturday, October 1st, Rockland is having their second annual fall festival uptown on Union Street. And I have 10 crafts and stuff for kids. Anybody is able and willing to volunteer for an hour or even a half hour, it's really busy at the tent.
A lot of bored kids. Also, the week after that, October 8th, is our next coffee house featuring the Jethros. So sometime between now and then, we're going to need volunteers to help change over the hall.
Oh, and it's craft night, October, whatever the first Tuesday is.
Okay, so we won't get too far ahead with craft night. Any other announcements? All right, then I'd like to welcome our special guest minister for today to the podium, Reverend Stephen Edington. He's been with us before, and we're happy to have him back.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. It's good to be back with you again. I believe I was here back in December as we were leading into the holidays. So thanks for having me back again. I live up in Nashua, New Hampshire. I had the Nashua Church up there for 24 years. Hard for me to believe that, even as I say it. I've been retired for several years now. Let us be together for our Ingathering Prayer. Blessed and holy Spirit of life, we know that life is a gift to us and through us. May we be open to its flow. May we be open to sharing our special life gift with others. For we meet here in celebration of the life that is given to and through us. This morning, may we turn our thoughts to how we can touch and be touched, love and be loved, forgive and be forgiven, heal and be healed, so that the goodness of our lives may be a shared blessing. Blessed be. Well, you've welcomed and greeted me already. Thank you for that. You can welcome and greet each other now for the next minute here. Extend your greetings to one another. Say hello to your neighbors.
Please stand as you are willing and able for the lighting of the chalice. And please recite with me the words found in the order of service. Kindling this flame of our liberal heritage in our chalice of community, let us open to the presence of the sacred. And now the affirmation, please. Love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity and fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other, and with God. And now we will sing our opening hymn, number 298, Wake Now, My Senses. All right, it's now at this time that we will share our joys and concerns with one another as part of a community that celebrates and heals together. Julie? Do you know how many years? I don't.
And maybe also
You're gonna hear about that. I'll light a candle of joy for the farmer's market yesterday. A little fun. Debbie? Yeah. Carolyn? All right, and I will light one more for all the joys and concerns that we hold in our hearts.
Words for our prayer meditation are by Martha Kirby Capo. As we gather in this shared and sacred space, let us renew both our commitment and our covenant. There are those among us, here present or not, who have endured a loss this past week. May their hope be uplifted again from this community of faith. May they find renewed strength. There are those among us who have wrestled with questions that seem to have no answer this past week. May they find sanctuary in this community of faith. There are those among us who have cherished an unexpected joy this past week. May their gladness be celebrated. As we commit to continue our free and responsible search for truth, may we covenant to honor the many paths that have led to this community. Amen and blessed be. May we sing together, Spirit of Life.
It is now at this time that we take a collection to support our church and its many ministries and services to the community. Please stand as you're willing and able to join me in the dedication of offering of gifts, number 403, Spirit of Truth.
Before we, let's get down there. You'll be seated. I'm slipping an extra item into the order of service here. Before we hear Leonard Cohen, I want to read a very short passage by Dorothy Day titled Commitment. People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do. Dorothy Day. Thanks for arranging that, Rick. Thank you. There we go. when the late Leonard Cohen was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, these words were part of the tribute to him. For 6 decades, Leonard Cohen revealed his soul to the world through his poetry and song, his deep and timeless humanity touching our very soul. His words and music will resonate forever. And indeed, they will. And among the many enigmatic lines of poetry in his songs like Suzanne or Hallelujah, are the ones we just heard from Anthem. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I'd say what Cohen is doing here is giving us a metaphor of how light can shine through even some of the broken places, the cracks in our lives and our world, or into those places and at those times when our assumptions about who we are and how we're to believe and interact with the world around us suddenly get cracked open. It's an image of his I find very compelling. And when we encounter a crack in the way that Cohen is using the term here, I'd say we can generally go one of two ways with it. We can try to patch it over, move on, as if it were never really there, or we can run the risk of seeing what kind of light might come through it, even if what we are seeing coming through that crack is unsettling or disturbs us when we first see it. I think back, way back now, more years than I want to admit, to when I was in college, when I'm thinking about some of the cracks that can occur in a mindset, when we are challenged to think and act beyond the assumptions that may have grounded our lives up to that point, as well as the life of the society in which we are living. So the first major crack in my consciousness I just mentioned was one I experienced when I got to college, a school down in southern West Virginia called Marshall University. And I'd grown up in a very conservative Christian setting in a Baptist church down there in southern West Virginia, and headed off to prepare for college, which I assumed would be like the one I had witnessed in the church in which I was raised. Well, between some of the classes I took, particularly ones in religion and philosophy, as I went on to become a philosophy minor, this was as they were taught in a state university. And some of the students I met up with who had worldviews and religious beliefs very different from mine, and my interactions with some very liberal-minded interfaith university chaplains, well, my worldview didn't just develop a crack, it got blown right up. And that was pretty scary. It's very scary. Everything, the assumptions I had up to the 18th, 19th year of my life were kind of coming apart. And my first impulse as a way of papering over the crack was to seek refuge in some of the more quasi-fundamentalist groups on campus, like the Campus Crusade for Christ, which was the direction some of my friends who were experiencing some of the same cracks in their faith as I was in mine took for themselves. Well, I don't fault them for that. They made their choices. I made mine. It was all a long time ago. We're all in our 70s now, and we've since lived out most of our lives according to the choices we made back then. Now, to this day, I cannot fully say why I chose to take the route to liberal Christianity when my original religious and spiritual worldview was cracking up. I have to give credit, a lot of the credit, to those campus ministers who helped me build a new religious and spiritual foundation as my initial one had broken down. They showed me where to look for some new light that would come through those cracks in my life at that time. I wasn't quite ready at that time to make the leap to Unitarian Universalism. That came a few years later. But liberal Christianity gave me what I needed then. And my college experience put me on a path that some years later eventually led me to the UU ministry. And many of the people who find their way to our UU congregations, as I've been able to observe over the past 4 decades or more now, also some of them come experiencing a similar kind of crack in their religious or spiritual consciousness. A crack in some of the beliefs and the assumptions that may have previously guided them. Or they may be people who were raised in a largely secular setting and have come to experience certain spiritual needs or reaching beyond themselves for some deeper meaning in our lives. And I would say the challenge for our UU congregations, not only this one, all the ones that are across the country here, I would say the challenge for our UU congregations is, what kind of light do we have to offer for the openings, for the cracks that persons such as these are experiencing? For many of the surveys I've seen on religious trends and attitudes in our society point to an increasingly large number of women and men in their 20s and 30s who feel little attachment to any kind of traditional religion or to a traditional religious community, but who still show an interest in and a need for some spiritual growth and nurture, just looking for something to ground that in. And I really do think the future of our Unitarian Universalist movement, I'm now fully retired from its ministry, other than take speaking engagements like this one. I think it really lies in good measure in finding the right kind of light, the right kind of way to focus it on this portion of our population. Well, okay, let's move on, do some more things with Cohen's metaphor. We're going to try it out in some other areas. Sometimes his crack, as I've already hinted at, can shine light on things we'd rather not have to see or confront, but it's a line that needs to be shown nonetheless. I would say such is the case in the highly disturbing events we saw leading up to and still ongoing in the aftermath of our most recent presidential election. The congressional inquiry into the forces and the persons behind those horrifying events of January 6th that took place in our nation's capital, they're going to resume again this coming week. We're still talking about it at the congressional level. I would say our current president won his office in the face of very painful, disturbing rip or crack in our national fabric by his predecessor. That predecessor's out of office, crack is still there. And it can't be explained in any one way. I'm just going to take one angle this morning, where I think the crack, in some measure, does really have to do with the interplay of race and class and the manipulation of fear, the manipulation of racial fears and class identity. It has to do with what the New York Times columnist Charles Blow called the fear of white male displacement. And the changing of our president, as we have seen, has not gotten rid of that fear and its implications or its repercussions. As I said, the January 6th insurrection was simply one of the more blatant and visible examples of that fear. Well, I think what we saw a year ago, this past January, was a violent and chaotic expression of a deeper cultural sentiment found in the lives of persons who probably wouldn't come close to taking the kinds of actions that these perpetrators of domestic terrorism did. But they're feeling some of the same kinds of misguided, manipulated disaffection that drove that horrible incident. Well, what is the light that comes through this crack? Or no, it was not the former president who created the forces of reaction and fear came through that crack. He just pulled off the board, so to speak, but let those forces out and into the light and gave them something of a kind of a legitimacy they didn't previously have or deserve. I go back to the caveat I offered a while ago. The Trump phenomenon cannot be reduced to any one single cause or factor. So to stay with our metaphor for today, I'm going to shed a little light on what I see as being just one of them. And I reflect on my personal history, to which I've already alluded, as I look for such light. Well, I'm a product of a white, Southern, Appalachian culture, as was my father with his 8th grade education that he got in a couple of one-room schoolhouses. The state in which I was raised and where I still have family and friendship ties gave the largest percentage of its votes in the past presidential election to the former president than did any other state in the union. That's my mountain mama, West Virginia. It was my college experience, which I referred at a state university there, that pointed me away from some of the views and the attitudes I got from my upbringing. Views and attitudes, I should add, that I got in a very loving and caring family and church setting. And at that time, even though I came from a struggling working class family, I could afford a college education, some of which I had to work to pay for, some with some modest scholarship help. I graduated debt-free, headed north to a liberal theological seminary. Didn't know any money for what I had previously had. I think about what we paid for my son to go to University of Connecticut not too long ago and compare it to that. Well, what I recall then from my original cultural setting, which I've only very briefly described, what I still see there on my trips back home, is something, a kind of desperation on the part of many who feel trapped by it. People who cannot see a way out, as I somehow, by the grace of the universe, did. And when one feels trapped in such a socioeconomic box, and with a battered kind of identity, as in, I don't count for much, the automatic reflex is to look for people to blame. Immigrants, persons of color, liberals in general, LGBTQ people, or whoever the scapegoat du jour may be. And it really baffles me as to how someone who has no more of a connection to that culture than I would to a Martian culture, if there were such a thing, could manipulate those feelings all the way to the United States presidency. Yes, that presidency is over. The attempt to continue it for another 4 years was defeated. But those waters still flow. Crack still remains. We've yet to see what all comes through it. Just consider a couple of things. There are now pieces of legislation pending in more than half of our states to limit the access to voting that was available in those states this past November. In several states, persons who could not accept the outcome of the 2020 presidential election are now running for state offices that would allow them to tamper with votes in those states. How successful that is remains to be seen. Alongside these kinds of legislative moves are pieces of legislation also pending in several states aimed at transgendered persons, including ones that would attempt to deny physicians from offering their advice or services to young people who are struggling with their cultural and sexual identity. And this is just the latest cultural war wedge issue in the religious and political right as they look for yet another segment of our population to demonize for whatever political gain may be gotten from it. And then most recently, we've seen the exploitation of our very admittedly difficult, challenging immigration concerns, which we do have to come to terms with. They are concerns that do indeed need to be addressed. But deliberately offering false promises to a group of Venezuelans fleeing political persecution and then using them as political pawns for the governor's political ambitions is way beyond the pale. As commendable as they were treated when they arrived in this part of our world. But what is the light then that comes through this crack? I'd say we've had a light shown on an aspect of our society we may have thought we'd gotten past back when we twice elected an African-American president. It's a light that tells us the forces of reaction and fear are alive and well amongst us. But I don't think this should call us into despair. For our last election showed that while the forces of reaction cannot be eliminated, they will not be eliminated. They can be kept at bay. They can be overcome. And that's the light we should welcome. And that fact alone, that light alone, should call us to redouble our efforts in creating a beloved community of liberty and justice for all. I may be carrying coals to Newcastle here in the state of Massachusetts when I say you got to vote, vote, vote. Well, moving on. I'll offer a few quick observations I'd like to as to how we apply this crack and metaphor to the pandemic that we have come through, we continue to deal with yet on one level. We can only hope it's into its gradual, maybe final downturn now. And yes, some really good light has come through this pandemic crack. We've seen how the energies and the resources of science produced a vaccine far quicker than we might have imagined. We've seen the heroic efforts of healthcare workers who risked and sometimes even tragically lost their lives attending to those afflicted with COVID-19 and the Delta and Omicron variants that came in its wake. We've seen millions of people like yourselves, I'm sure, who have reached out in love and care in the midst of all kinds of obstacles to those who needed your love and care the most. I would say in a number of ways, the light that came through that COVID crack actually showed some of the best that is in us. Unfortunately, that light has also been shown, as we well know, on some of the more disturbing currents in our societal life. An anti-science current, often with, yet again, conspiracy theories of one kind or another behind it. It's a mindset perpetuated by certain social media outlets as other sources that has quite literally cost human lives. And for all the positive aspects of social media, like say the websites, the Facebook pages that your congregation has, that practically all of our UU congregations have, all those good things. It's also given us what I call the legitimization of ignorance. That is to say, a situation where any opinion, theory, idea, conspiracy theory, etc., however detached from reality it may be, can gain a perverse kind of legitimacy if it can be spread widely enough. Like, gee, I read this on the internet, there must be something to it. Well, what then? Have these dual rays of light taught us about ourselves? How do we take all the positive lessons and examples we've seen over the past 2 years and more of who we are and how we can be for one another and put them to even greater use in the days and the years ahead? And how do we confront and honestly and meaningfully deal with those terribly fallen and broken places in our societal life that have also been illuminated in the course of the pandemic? This is a great conversation I see ahead of us now as a society and a culture. And the voices of our liberal religious communities from many faith traditions, not only our UU family, many faith traditions, really need to be an integral and vital part of that conversation. Should the day come, as I hope and believe it will, when we can say we put this pandemic behind us, even though some forms of COVID will still stay with us, we can ill afford paper over the crack in our society and culture that it has revealed to us. I'd say once we heal from the physical effects of a pandemic, we still have much healing to do. And I hope we can be agents of that healing in one way or another. Well, I'm going to go back to Leonard Cohen now as I begin to wind this down. Another line in Anthem says, "Forget your perfect offering." I like that one as much as I like the one about the crack. Forget your perfect offering. For as we go about our efforts to bring greater levels of justice, equity, and compassion into our world, we're not always going to get it right. We're not going to be perfect. To think otherwise is arrogant. We have no perfect offerings to bring. Is that inside or out? I can't even tell. Okay, fine. We have no perfect offerings to bring. Thought for a minute there's a thunderstorm going on. I can probably do the last couple paragraphs just speaking over this. Okay, all right. What we do bring are our imperfect selves to our imperfect world. A world with its tremendous beauty, as well as its ugliness and pain. A world with its places of wonderful wholesomeness and its places of deep brokenness. Forget your perfect offering and bring instead your gifts of love and care, passion and compassion to those places where you can be, in whatever great or small ways, an agent of hope, an agent of light. And as you do, keep before you those words of Dorothy Day I read a little earlier. She was a really outstanding leader in the Catholic worker movement. She said, "No one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do." Blessed be. Speaking of light, let's sing about claiming the growing light. Number 345.
Please remain standing as you are willing and able as we extinguish the chalice. And recite with me the words found in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, or the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Now may love which overcomes all differences, shields all wounds, puts to flight all fears, reconciles all who are separated. Yes, among us, now and always, we will.